Jordan Tate walked briskly down the gleaming courthouse hallway, the sharp clack of his polished boots echoing off the marble floors. With over a decade in uniform behind him, Jordan wore his badge like armor, a symbol of control he had come to depend on. In his eyes, the law wasn't always about justice. It was about order and ensuring that people he saw as problems stayed in line. And today, he believed he was doing just that. The case that morning was minor in the grand scheme of theft trial involving a black defendant. Nothing violent, nothing flashy, just another name on a docket. But Jordan, already convinced of the man's guilt, regarded it as another opportunity to exercise his authority. "They're all the same," he muttered to himself under his breath, scanning the hall as he walked. He narrowed his gaze as he passed witnesses, attorneys, and court officials. Most avoided his eyes. But one figure stood out, a black woman, dressed sharply in a navy blue suit, walking with calm purpose down the hallway. She wasn't loud or ostentatious, but there was something about her that unsettled him. Perhaps it was her posture, upright, composed. Or maybe it was the fact that she didn't shrink under his stare. "Watch where you're going," Jordan snapped as they passed, his tone clipped and irritated. The woman paused, clearly taken aback. "I'm sorry," she said calmly. "Didn't mean to bump you." But that wasn't enough for Jordan. He sneered, eyes darkening. "Typical. You people never know your place." The woman's brow furrowed, but she said nothing. Her silence wasn't submission, it was something else. Something colder. Jordan stepped forward, blocking her path. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "This section isn't for folks like you." She lifted her chin, unfazed. "I have business here. Court-related." He scoffed. "Let me guess, you're here to defend your cousin? Or maybe you're one of those people always shouting about injustice every time someone gets arrested." Again, she didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed locked on his. Around them, the hallway had quieted. Conversations hushed. People were watching now. Jordan felt the power of the moment surge through him. He wasn't just a man in uniform, was the authority in this space. And this woman, in his mind, was just another person trying to pretend she belonged in a world that didn't welcome her. "You don't belong here," he said, voice low and laced with disdain. "You need to leave. Now." Her voice didn't waver. "I have every right to be here." He bristled. "I don't think so." Without hesitation, Jordan raised a hand and gestured to two officers standing nearby. "Escort her out." The younger officers hesitated. "Officer Tate," one began. "Now," Jordan barked. They moved toward her, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am," one said cautiously, "you'll have to come with us." The woman didn't budge. She didn't argue or yell. She simply looked at Jordan, her gaze steady, unblinking. It made his stomach twist in a way he didn't expect. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The officers grabbed her arms and began pulling her gently, but firmly away. Jordan watched with smug satisfaction. In his mind, she had been put in her place. But before the doors closed behind her, she turned her head. Her eyes met his one last time. There was no fear. No doubt. Just that same, steady, unreadable calm. It chilled him more than a scream would have. Jordan scoffed, trying to shake the feeling. "Just another one trying to act important," he muttered. But the hallway wasn't the same anymore. People stared not in admiration, but in quiet disbelief. Court officers avoided his eyes. And then, like a thunderclap in a still sky, a voice spoke behind him. "Do you know what you just done?" Jordan turned to see a man in a dark gray suit approaching Jonathan Hale, one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the state. His expression was unreadable. "I did my job," Jordan snapped. "She didn't belong here." Hale's jaw tightened. "That woman you just removed is Dr. Alexandria Monroe, Deputy Director of National Protective Services." Jordan's world stopped. "What?" "She's one of the highest-ranking security officials in the federal government. And you just laid hands on her in a public courthouse. On camera. In front of witnesses." Jordan felt the ground tilt beneath him. Behind him, someone gasped. Before he could respond, Dr. Monroe's voice rang out from the hallway. "I want a federal task force dispatched immediately. We have a breach of protocol and potential civil rights violations at the Alexandria courthouse." The words hit him like a brick. Around him, the murmurs grew louder. Phones were out. Eyes were recording. The arrogance that had fueled him began to crack. Jonathan Hale stepped closer, lowering his voice. You need to prepare for what comes next. This is far from over. Then came the final blow-up booming voice from the opposite end of the hallway. Officer Tate. It was Judge Stephen Calloway, the Chief Justice of the court, his face a storm of fury. Report to my chambers. Now. Jordan's spine stiffened. Sir, Now, the judge barked. Jordan walked slowly toward the chambers, the weight of every eye bearing down on him. The badge that had made him feel invincible now felt like a shackle. Inside the judge's chambers, a half-dozen senior officials were already seated. The tension was electric. The judge didn't invite him to sit. You assaulted a high-ranking government official, Judge Calloway said, voice cold. Do you understand the consequences of that? Jordan opened his mouth but found no words. Your arrogance today has created a national incident. Before he could respond, the door opened. Jonathan Hale stepped inside. I warned you, Hale said simply. You broke the oath you swore to uphold. Outside, the story had already gone viral. Footage of the arrest spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed misconduct, racial profiling, and abuse of power. Jordan Tate's name trended nationwide for all the wrong reasons. By morning, he was suspended. By afternoon, he was under federal investigation. And by the end of the week, he was dismissed, badge surrendered, career destroyed. Meanwhile, at a different precinct, something else was unfolding. Special Agent Marcus Lane stood outside a holding cell, his jaw clenched in fury. Inside, his wife Dr. Camille Lane sat with her wrists cuffed. Her crime? Buying a rare academic book at a local bookstore and being out of place while doing so. Marcus stared at the sergeant. You're going to open that cell, he said calmly. You're going to remove those cuffs. Then you're going to say her name and apologize. Because what you did today isn't just bad judgment, it's profiling. And I will not let it slide. The sergeant didn't argue. He just nodded, reached for the keys, and opened the door. Dr. Lane stood slowly. Her wrists bore the red imprints of the cuffs. She didn't look at the officer. She didn't need to. She stepped outside, and Marcus was waiting. No words passed between them. None were needed. Later, standing on the courthouse steps, Dr. Lane addressed the media. I'm not angry, she said. I'm not even surprised. I'm just tired. Tired of being treated like a threat for simply existing. Her words echoed across the nation. In the weeks that followed, reforms swept through the system. A new oversight committee was formed. Racial bias training became mandatory. Officers like Jordan Tate became symbols not of power, but of the urgent need for change. Dr. Alexandria Monroe returned to work with renewed purpose. She began speaking at conferences, universities, and federal summits. Her message was clear. Dignity is not optional, and silence is no longer an option. The world wouldn't forget her name, and Jordan Tate would never forget the look in her eyes, that calm, that stillness. It hadn't been weakness. It had been power, and it had changed everything. 2 months after the courthouse incident, the name Alexandria Monroe had become more than a trending topic. It was a headline, a legislative catalyst, and in many communities, a symbol of silent strength that could no longer be ignored. The video of her being dragged from a federal building by an officer who never asked a single identifying question had sparked a congressional inquiry, civil rights marches, and a surge of whistleblower testimonies from within the law enforcement system itself. But for Monroe, the impact wasn't about her. It was about what followed. At a press conference in D.C., she stood before rows of journalists, not with fury, but with facts. I was not harmed physically, she began. But that's not the point. The system harmed itself. Because when procedure fails to ask, who are you? It's no longer about protecting justice. It's about protecting ego. Behind her, flanking the stage, were representatives from civil liberties unions, the Federal Oversight Council, and even a few former officers who had come forward in solidarity. Among them was a quietly seated woman, Dr. Camille Lane, who now headed a newly formed division within the DOJ called Project Equal Entry, designed to track racial profiling incidents in real time. Dr. Monroe turned toward the camera as if speaking directly to every citizen who had ever felt watched, suspected, or diminished. This is not about one officer. This is about one opportunity, and we will not waste it. Her words ricocheted across television screens, social media feeds, and town hall meetings. Within weeks, cities like Chicago, Atlanta, and Oakland began drafting new public identity protocols, laws requiring officers to state cause before engaging with individuals in federal buildings, courthouses, and transportation centers. It was being called the Monroe Model, and its momentum was undeniable. But not everyone welcomed the change. At a retired police officer's luncheon in Dallas, Jordan Tate sat hunched at the far edge of the room, unshaven, wearing the same black blazer he had worn the day he was dismissed. Whispers passed around him like second-hand smoke, some sympathetic, others spiteful. He wasn't invited. He just showed up. He had lost everything. His job, his pension, his housing allowance. His friends no longer returned calls. Even his brother, a state trooper, kept his distance. But what haunted Jordan the most wasn't the punishment, it was the absence. The absence of pride. The absence of justification. And the absence of the illusion that he had once mistaken for righteousness. Late at night, he would replay the footage on mute. The angle from someone's cell phone. The image of her standing there not flinching, not yelling, just looking. He had come to realize that it was not her who had been out of place. It was him. Still, that understanding didn't fix anything. Not for him. In the meantime, Jonathan Hale, whose firm now handled dozens of similar cases pushed for deeper legislative reform. He gave testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, submitting evidence not just of Alexandria Monroe's removal, but of over 230 other instances where black professionals have been stopped, searched, or sidelined in federal facilities with no cause beyond appearance. "We are not asking for exceptions," he said firmly into the microphone. "We are asking for enforcement of the rights already written in your Constitution." Meanwhile, a movement was building online. It started with a hashtag, "Let Her Stand," but it evolved into something more. Across the country, women, mostly black women, began posting videos in courtrooms, libraries, universities, even airports. In each clip, they stood still, silent, poised, dignified. The caption was always the same: "I belong here." The visual resistance shook cultural foundations. News outlets picked it up. Schools began to discuss it. In New York, an entire subway car fell silent as a woman in a brown trench coat stood near the conductor's door holding nothing but a printed sign with those three words: "I belong here." At Howard University, a young law student named Elise Vaughn watched one of the videos during a lunch break. Inspired, she wrote a blog post titled "Inheritance of Stillness," which went viral for its analysis of how dignity, when weaponized properly, could undermine centuries of systemic intimidation. The article reached Alexandria Monroe, who asked to meet her. That meeting would spark the mentorship that later shaped Elise into one of the youngest civil rights advisors to the U.S. Attorney General's office. Monroe, for her part, remained deliberately quiet for a time. She did not appear on talk shows. She did not publish a memoir. Instead, she returned to work, overseeing a task force to root out systemic misconduct in federal enforcement agencies. Her approach was clinical, surgical, and methodical. But those closest to her, like Camille and Marcus Lane, knew the toll it took. In private moments, Monroe would sit in her office at dusk, the window open to the city skyline, and let the silence remind her of that day. Not because she was reliving trauma, but because she wanted to remember exactly what she had felt. Not fear, not rage, but resolve. Across town, Tiana Cole, who had once been wrongfully detained for nothing more than existing in a bookstore, launched a nonprofit with her husband, Agent Marcus Lane, called Silent Thread. Its mission: offer legal and psychological support for women of color falsely accused or harassed in public spaces. The tagline on their letterhead read, "What you endure in silence, we answer with structure." Their work attracted donors, volunteers, and eventually congressional recognition. But it also attracted pushback. Several city departments across the country tried to quietly block the circulation of silent threads training materials in their academies. They failed. Public pressure was now impossible to ignore. A year after the courthouse incident, Congress passed the Federal Identity Equity Act, mandating enhanced protections for all citizens in federal spaces and creating an anonymous accountability platform for victims of profiling to file direct reports to the DOJ. The act was signed into law on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Dr. Alexandria Monroe stood behind the president during the signing. She said nothing. She just stood. As the crowd erupted in applause, Jordan Tate watched from a television in a halfway house in Virginia. He was alone. He had been offered chances to speak out, to apologize publicly, to contribute to the reform efforts. But he had declined every invitation. Pride still clung to him like a shadow that refused to detach. He reached for the remote, but something stopped him. He watched the scene unfold, watched as Camille Lane spoke to a group of survivors, watched as Tiana Cole shook hands with lawmakers, watched as Elise Vaughn walked across the stage with a law degree in one hand and a folder of policy reforms in the other. And then the camera cut to Monroe, just standing, still. Jordan turned off the TV. The silence in the room was thick. He placed the remote down slowly, exhaled, and for the first time in months spoke aloud. She knew, he whispered. She knew all along what she was doing. And she had. In a world that demanded shouting, Monroe had answered with silence. Not because she lacked the words, but because she understood the moment didn't need noise. It needed clarity. Clarity that would echo in every courtroom, every precinct, every federal hallway where a single glance could determine whether someone was honored or humiliated. In the years that followed, her legacy was formalized. Law students cited her testimony in lectures. A documentary titled The Stand aired nationally, earning critical acclaim. And in 2030, a Justice Reform Center bearing her name opened in Washington, D.C. Above the entrance hung a quote she had once said in a private meeting, now etched into steel. "We do not fight fire with fire. We fight ignorance with presence." And in that presence, a nation found its conscience.